on from my demo about how to record reggae, I do funk today. Now my sort of style that I like, funk music, is really the sort of early 70s, from roughly 1970 to 74, 75. I know that sounds rather specific, but it's partly to do with the technology that was available at the time, namely 16-track recorders at the outside, but sometimes only 8-track. But the fewer the tracks on the recorder, the more level you could put on that tape, because the tape was quite wide. So 8-track 1-inch, for example, was a format of the 1960s and 70s. And it enabled the engineer to really push drums and guitars and bass to get that real gritty type sound, that sort of overdriven type thing. Now I've got GarageBand iOS here, and I'm going to record something. I'm going to record a bit of funk music. I'm going to go really minimal. Don't forget, with the number of tracks that were available, you couldn't put all these things on, all these extra keyboards and all this extra stuff, without a lot of extra hassle. So I'm going to just go and find the drummer app. Now, of course, you'd want to ideally program or play in your own drum part. But if we go to the acoustic drums, there is a drummer on here. Let's have a Levi, Funky Songwriter, whatever that means. Now, I'm going to go quite sort of basic with this. I'm not sure I like all those sort of offbeat, I just want something really basic. So if you go with your joystick here, move to the left maybe slightly. I'm going to go with that, but the sounds on GarageBand iOS are amazingly good, but I want to mash things up a bit. I want to get sort of gritty with it. So if we go back to the main page and then click on Settings and Plugins and EQ, if we edit that and then put an overdrive in the signal chain, you get something like this. Quite like that. And then you can go back into the drummer itself and tweak your changes, but with the overdrive pedal, well, overdrive plugin still in place. I'm going to go with that setting for now because it's not overly complicated. You've got a snare, a kick drum on every beat, or every 2 beats, but you've got that double there. I'm not sure I'm into that at the moment. So what you can do is you can just split this, delete that, and then just loop what you had before. It's just a good basis on which to put some bass on. Now, I've got my Fender Precision here running through my iRig Stomp, which is a pedal that allows you to connect your instruments up to GarageBand. So I'm going to get a bass amp. Let's have a look. Drummer, amplifier, bass. Now it defaults to this sort of Ampeg SVT type thing. We could try something else. I'm just going to go into the monitor so I can hear. Okay, so I've got my input level there. I'm going to stick with that amp for the moment because it's got a bit of compression on it. Can always change things afterwards and then put the bass through a sort of a distortion unit or something to make it match those drums. Okay, so I'm going to record a line. I'm just going to set my 8 bars. I'm going to go for 18, a bit like I did with the reggae thing, so that I can have kind of a minute's worth of tune, and there's your drums all stacked up ready to go. So, okay, here we go. So that bass sounds fairly disagreeable, which is lovely. We like that. Now, guitar-wise, the sort of funk music that I listen to, that sort of early 70s funk music, isn't always wah-wah pedal driven. It's not always that. And I think it can get in the way. It can sort of say, here's the guitar, rather than it being a part. So I'm going to go for a clean sound here. Now, back in the 70s, there was this sort of introduction to transistor amps. All of the ones on here are sort of valve amp simulators. So maybe actually I don't want to go too heavy-handed with the sort of valve amp side of things. Now I'm going to turn the gain down a bit. Now I can actually, you know, tweak this afterwards, but I'm going to record some guitar and then see how it stacks up against that bass. It's quite clean sounding at the moment. Don't know. Now, at the moment, things are, they're not quite gelling yet. Not sure about that bass at the moment. It's quite loud in the mix, so I'm just going to turn it down a bit to allow that first guitar to come through. And I'm going to stick a second guitar down that's maybe a little bit more gritty. Now, helpfully, when you open up the Marshall Plexi, or Marshall JCM rather, on this, it puts a phaser pedal with it. That was a good effect, one of the main effects of those early records. I am actually going to take the gain down a little bit so I can go. See what happens with that. Now, can you hear that echo on there? I don't really want that. This is just kind of that sort of modern delay sound. We're sort of trying to hark back here. So I'm just going to check that there's no effects on that. And it also doesn't work unless you're actually on the plugin itself. See what happens now. That's too busy. We're trying to get a groove that's got space here, and those chords, sure, they cover the spaces up, but the space created by the bass I want to try and get on this as well. So I've got to halve really what I'm doing. Complete with a little mistake at the end. Not sure. That's sort of... Now, at the moment, really with guitars and bass, that's kind of it. Let's remember our 8-track tape recorder. You may have had drums in stereo, or you may have had the 3 mic setup. So let's assume we've got the drums as a stereo mix. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things there. So that's 5 out of your 8 tracks gone already. So one thing that we could do, and other things of that sort of funk era, were some quite classic keyboard designs of the time, all of which are built into this. So I'm just going to remove the thing that's charging my iPad at the moment, and I'm going to put in instead a keyboard, which I'm going to use. You can use the on-screen keyboard here, but it's a little bit, you know, to get those sort of nuances that you might want doing this sort of stuff, we've got to be a bit careful. So I'm going to go to keyboard, more sounds. Now in the list of things here, we've got the electric piano, the clav, organ, and the whirly piano, which were the main things that were around in that era, of course, in addition to the grand piano itself. Now I'm going to go for a Wurlitzer piano. Now, try finding one of these on eBay. They are like hen's teeth. You just can't find them. Now, it's got a drive control here. Yeah. Okay, now I'm just going to go back into the settings and just take that reverb off, and then maybe compress it a little bit with a bit of with a bit of sort of treble, maybe slightly lower down treble, sort of into the 2K range to get that bite. Okay, now given that I've got bass here, I don't want to be a left-hand keyboard player where I'm just pumping loads of bass in. Now, got to get a bit careful with how much I put in. Now, that's a software instrument. I'm not going to go anywhere near the quantize button. Nowhere near it. I want those little rhythmic pushes and the human feel to be retained. So if you can possibly avoid the quantize button, it really does help with trying to realise this sort of genre. Now, clavinet was something that was around, you know, Stevie Wonder Superstition, 1972. That's right in the middle of that funk period that I really like. Now, the GarageBand one is very, very good. It doesn't allow all the pickup settings that you had on the original instrument, but one thing you want to do is to take all of these effects off initially. Now, the spikiness, that rhythmic spikiness, we want to retain, but we want to make this really minimal. So, How are things stacking up so far? Those drums are quite quiet at the moment, so I'm just going to take everything down a little bit in the mix because I want those drums to sound really tough. Now, at this stage, I'm going to redo the bass. Because I was playing the bass only to the drums, it wasn't really gelling rhythmically. It took a while to settle down. Now, if you're doing any recording, it's best to really just think, do you know what? I've got to get this right. I've got to get this sounding really tight. Otherwise, it's kind of not going to work. So I'm going to just check my bass sound. There's a bit of distortion there. I don't care. So. That sat better because I was listening to all of those other parts, and actually when I was putting those guitar parts down I did think, oh, that bass, oh. So what happened there was I kind of had to put the bass to one side in my ears and just think about what those drums were doing. So drums wise, we need it to be a little bit filthier. Now you can, of course, add overdrive to any of these channels. I think the Whirly did have a bit of drive on it anyway. Yeah, a bit of distortion. I might just put a little bit more on just to get those upper harmonics out there. And to, of course, take that metronome away. It's very easy for it to be left on. You're thinking, what's that annoying sound? Oh, it's the metronome. Now, of course, you could go on and on and on, getting those sort of sounds to be a bit more gritty and dirty using the overdrive on here. But what you have to do is you have to make sure also that the output level of the iPad isn't starting to bottom out. Otherwise, it just ends up this sort of mess. Now, in terms of things like tape hiss, you know, that sort of noise that you get that goes with a funk record, or indeed record crackle, you could add it to something like this for extra effect. But actually, sometimes you can just get that, if the sounds are right on there, and you've got that rhythmic space, that's kind of most of it.